You read it in your email. We're starting the course on Israel, specifically through the lens of the Six-Day War. A lot of the questions that were raised throughout the world internationally about Israel became a lot stronger after the Six-Day War, which is why looking at Israel through the lens of the Six-Day War will give us a very broad understanding of the answers to many of the questions. On the screen right now is just an advertisement, a quick plug for Land in the Spirit, which is a trip to Israel, 5-star trip. Very, very informational, very educational. So coming up in 2018. If you're interested, look it up, landandspirit.org. Okay, so we start off with the Six-Day War. We're going to go into the history, the difficulties, and the messages from the Six-Day War. Now, there was a lot to talk about the Six-Day War. Obviously, the war itself, the aftermath of the war, and then more importantly, we're going to start off with the before the war. Because in order to get a good understanding of what the Six-Day War looked like, understanding what led into the Six-Day War will help us get a better appreciation for that. So that's the objective of this course. We're going to do a quick overview of what the different lessons, starting off with lesson 1, which is today. We're going to be focusing on the prelude to the war, the run-up to the war, which will include also a discussion of, good evening, let's take a book, grab a book right here. It will include a discussion of good evening, Melanie, right here, books over here. Please find yourself a seat. Our rights to Israel. What rights do we have to this land? Which will also include the Torah Jewish perspective on why Jewish people need a land and what we're supposed to be doing with the land of Israel. Next week, please God, lesson 2, we'll be talking about the fact that Israel made the first move. Is that kosher? Are we allowed to start a war? But not only start a war, a preemptive attack, which has got its own discussions, legal, Torah perspective, which will include also the political and military perspective as regards to Israel. Okay. Now lesson 3, which will be the week after that, Jerusalem, an entire lesson dedicated to the fact that Jerusalem is the chosen city, what's the significance and the rest. We'll then skip 1 week, which is the 31st of this month, which will be the evening of Shavuos. We won't have a lesson that week. And we'll have 3 weeks after Shavuos, starting on the 6th of June, lesson 4, Land for Peace. Exchanging and bartering land for peace, which will have its own discussion. Lesson 5 the week after that, which will be Jewish connection to Israel. How important, how relevant is the victories in the land of Israel? If you just grab a book before you sit down. Israel's victories, the world at large, Jewish people, wherever we may be, celebrate and worry for Israel. Is that the way it should be? And then that will include also a discussion of Judaism and Zionism, which would be quite interesting. Lesson 6 will then look at anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, the cause, the understanding of it, what we can do about it, how we hope to survive, which will also include the 50-year campaign which we're celebrating to the Chabad campaign of Tefillin. The Tefillin campaign is actually 50 years old this year because as well as 50 years to the Six-Day War, it was during the build-up to the Six-Day War where Chabad people started hitting the streets and saying, excuse me sir, you're Jewish, have you had a chance to put on the tefillin today? Which in its day was very interesting. Today's become more acceptable. It's almost normal to be on an Al Al flight and see someone rolling up their sleeve and putting on tefillin in public, because a mitzvah of that kind, in lesson 6, we'll discuss how powerful it actually is. So that's the overview of the 6 lessons. Tonight, as we said, we're going to focus on the prelude, the warm-up, the run-up to the war, which we'll discuss also the claim and counterclaim, the Israelis claiming that we deserve to have Israel versus the Arabs saying, you Jews don't belong here and you have to get out of it, almost to the extent whether we're going to, God forbid, throw us into the sea. Okay, so that is the overview of tonight's lesson. We're going to start off with 3 questions. The Jewish claim to the land of Israel, our connection to the land. 3 questions. Question number 1, Israel and Judaism. What place does Israel have in Yiddishkeit? Or in other words, can we have Judaism without the land of Israel? We're not getting into the answer now, but this is a question we want to put forward because before the end of tonight, we want to know how important it is to have a land of Israel just because we're Jewish. Question number 2, let's say we decide we need to have Israel. Why? Do Jews really need a homeland? Can we not be Jewish here? And question number 3, let's say we need it. Is that our claim? Is that a good enough reason for the world to give us Israel? For us to claim that if someone takes it away from us, they still owe it to us. So the fact that we want it and we need it, is that a good enough reason to explain to everybody else that they should be giving it? In other words, the question at large is, how important is Israel to the Jewish people? In 3 different steps. We're going to start off with text 1, which you can open up your books to page 2 and find text 1. The way we do the readings are, everyone gets a chance to read. We read it in the English. If you're not comfortable reading, that's absolutely fine. Just say skip and we'll move on to the next person. So starting on page 2, we're going to start off here on my right. Very small, if you don't mind. Yeah, this is text 1. The background of the text is...
So I'm going to pass on just in the middle of it.
Yes, we'll get back to you soon. We'll start...
Let's all start eating.
Let's all start eating. All right, one second. Text 1 is a quote from the book of Daniel. Daniel is one of the books of Tanakh. And here we have an interesting quote. Rabbi Yossi, please.
On learning that the decree had been written, Daniel went to his home, where in the upstairs room there were windows open facing Jerusalem. 3 times a day he kneeled and prayed, he gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before him.
Okay, so the verse talks about it beforehand, about Daniel praying and giving thanks to Hashem, kneeling and praying, by a window which was open facing Jerusalem. Who's Daniel? Daniel was actually a tremendous scholar and also a prophet in his time. He would be one amongst the Jews who had been taken down into captivity by the Babylonians after they destroyed the temple. So this is the time before the first and second temple, 2,400 years ago roughly. And he had been chosen to be one of the emperor's biggest ministers. He was extremely smart. The other ministers at the time were quite jealous of the fact this young Jewish intake has arisen to such ranks, and they were actively looking for a plan to try and get the emperor at the time to get rid of Daniel. He was obviously very fond of him, and came up with a great idea. They convinced the emperor that if anyone was to pray to a god for anything they needed, that's an affront to the emperor. It's as if telling the emperor that you don't have everything, and we have to go to God for things. And therefore they convinced the emperor to pass a rule. Anyone who would be caught praying shall be thrown into the lion's den. And Daniel, afterwards, continued praying as before. He was immediately reported to the emperor, who had no choice after signing the decree to throw Daniel into the lion's den. And miraculously, Daniel was untouched. And the verse says God sent an angel to close the mouth of the lions. But miraculously, he was thrown into a pit of hungry lions, and he remained alive. But what's interesting to note is, 2,400 years ago, 2,400 years ago, Daniel is still praying, not in Jerusalem, not in Israel, but he's facing, from Babylonia, Iraq, he's facing Jerusalem when he prays. Those of us who have been to shul will know this. We in England stand facing east, as do people in America. But if you go down to Australia, they're facing north. If you go down to Syria, they're not facing east or north, they're facing west. Wherever we go, we always daven praying towards Yerushalayim. Sorry, Syria is actually south, my apologies. It's China and Australia where they're facing west. I just checked that. Okay. Yes, on the map it makes sense because they're north. The idea is wherever we're standing, we're always facing Jerusalem. Why so? Why do we pray davening towards Jerusalem? Clearly, although we're not in Israel, Israel still is important to us. But isn't God everywhere? Isn't God everywhere? Can't we pray wherever we may be? The answer is yes. But there's an epicenter. There's a spot in this world where heaven and earth connect, where God's presence is felt most. And that's why every shul built around the world will face towards Yerushalayim. And we are traveling. You'll find your compass out, and also, again, if you can, face towards Yerushalayim, which is interesting. But it's not just during davening, the Amidah, that we face Yerushalayim, because we do. Let's read a quote in the Amidah. They're not only facing Jerusalem, we actually mention Jerusalem and Israel in davening. Quote 2, we're going back to Sid.
Sound a great chauffeur for our freedom. Raise a banner to gather our exiles and
gather us from the four corners of the earth into the land, into our land, sorry. Blessed are you, who gather us from the dispersed into your land.
So 3 times a day we pray that midah, and again we're asking God, please bring us back to our land. And that's when we daven the midah. So every time we pray, we mention it. But it's not only when we pray. What else do Jews do a lot besides praying? Also learning. What else? Eat. We eat a lot. We do eat a lot. Every time there's a Yom Tov, we eat. Every time there's a half a Yom Tov, we again. There's always eating. But when we sit down to have a meal, we again make sure to mention Yerushalayim. Customary before benching, there's a quote to say before a regular weekday quote, and there's a Shabbos quote. Here we have a quote, 3a. Matt, you want to go for it?
By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept as we remembered Zion. We hung our harps on willows in its midst, for there our captors asked of us to sing songs, and tormentors insisted on joyful tunes. Sing for us of the songs of Zion, as we name it. How can we sing the song of God in God's throne? If I forgot you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cleave to my palate, if I do not remember you, if I do not recall Jerusalem at the height of my joy.
So that's the Levium, who would usually sing in the temple, who were being forced to play that same music in front of the captors, and they're crying out, how can we ever forget Yerushalayim? How often do we say this? Before we bench. We've had a meal, whenever it may be. If it's not a Shabbos, this is the quote we say. But if it's Shabbos or it's Yom Tov, we don't want to be mourning and thinking about how bad times are. We still mention Jerusalem. This is text 3b, David, please.
The song was said, God, when God returns to returnee of Zion, we will have been like dreamers. Our mouths will then be filled with laughter, and our tongue with song. They will then say among the nations, God has done amazing things for his nation.
That's the word. It was actually at a certain point, this was suggested to be the Israeli national anthem. Shir HaManas B'Shuv Hashem et Shivat Zion, returnees to Zion. And this is what we say every time there's a wedding, or there's a Shabbos or Yom Tov before we bench, we've had food, we mention returning to Zion. Let's do one more quote from benching 3c, please.
O God, have compassion on your people Israel, on your city Jerusalem, on Zion, the dwelling place of your glory, and the kingship of the house of David, your anointed one, and on the great and holy house upon which your name is called. We build Jerusalem, the holy city, speaking in our days.
Okay. Sorry, in benching, even in the middle of benching, we have again. So
It's there.
Absolutely. So every time we pray, and every time we eat, which is basically almost everything we're doing, we're constantly talking about Israel, Jerusalem, take us back, we can't forget about it, please let's have it again. Israel's clearly a big part of it. Throughout the ages, Jews have never forgotten about Israel. In every major event that Yiddishkeit celebrates, at every wedding, we break a glass. Why do we break a glass at the chuppah? Obviously, it's the signal for the musician to start the music. But why smash a glass to signal the musician? It's actually a memorial for the fact that we don't have the real wedding. We're not back in Jerusalem. And then the other way around, God forbid someone passes away during mourning. We comforters come to comfort those who are mourning. And we say, Hashem, comfort you amongst the mourners of Zion. We group every bit of mourning into the same mourning of old. When we have the highlights of Jewish holidays, of Pesach, the Seder night, how do we end the Seder night? Lashana haba b'Yerushalayim. And when we finish Yom Kippur, Shofar, what do we say? Lashana haba b'Yerushalayim, over again. Yerushalayim, Israel, Jerusalem, the Holy Land. It's there all throughout Yiddishkeit. But it's not only that. This wish to go back to Israel was actually actioned by many people all the way throughout history. The Aliyah movement. The Aliyah movement, people have been traveling back to Israel for all eternity, forever. Whenever someone had a chance to go back to Israel, people would grab it. Some notable Aliyahs to Israel. In 1915 was a big Aliyah. 1932, the Yemen Aliyah, where thousands of people came in 1949 and were brought over. These are some of the great Aliyah movements that took place throughout. So you have here on page 6, I think you should have this, a chart of all the notable areas. We don't have to go through it right now, but I think it's a double page there. Yeah, you got it, 6 and 7. Just a notable areas, we can look at it later, but throughout history, Jews have been trying to get back to Israel. Not only wishing for it, but actually actioning it. Let's read a text for where the Rambam, in his book of law, talks about going back to Israel. Yes, please.
But we have Jerusalem now, we have Israel now.
Yes.
Why do we continue to pray and to long for something that we have? Are you suggesting that we're saying longing for something else as well as Israel?
Oh, that's a very good question. In lesson 4, I want to talk a lot about that, but the short of it will be that just having a place where we can get to is not good enough for us. We need much more than just the geographical land. Some of it will be answered at the end of today, but in lesson 4, we're going to deal with your question a lot. Give me the answer. Want to go a book? Please. Okay, so we're up to text 4. This is on page something. Help me out. 8. So page 8, text 4. We're going to read about what the Rambam has to say about going back to Israel.
The great sages would kiss the boundaries of the land of Israel upon arrival, kiss its stones and roll in its dust. Indeed, it is written in Psalms 102:15, your servants cherish her stones and favour her dust. Although one cannot compare being received by the Holy Land during one's lifetime to being received by it after one's death, nevertheless, the greatest sages would bring their dead to be buried in the Holy Land, as can be learned from the example of our father Jacob and the righteous Joseph.
Okay, so the sages always went back there. To the very ground meant so much to them, and even if someone passed away locally or outside in the diaspora, they would try and get back there. Interestingly, it doesn't say this in the Rambam, but the Chevra Kadisha today, in a lot of places, will keep a stash, a stock of earth from Israel and put a bit of earth as they bury people here, mixing into the earth as they bury people, so at least there will be something of Israel even here. The Rambam himself didn't live in Israel. He was born in Spain, he was later in Egypt for his entire life. However, when he passed away, he's buried in Israel. He himself was buried in Israel, a miraculous story in itself. There was another interesting quote, we have her in text 5, from the Kuzari of Yehuda Halevi, a poet, a Jewish poet, wrote thousands of poems, very famous in his day. Text 5, of David, please.
My heart is in the east, and I am at the ends of the west. How can I taste what I eat, and how could it be savoured? How shall I render my vows and my bonds, while I rise yet in the fetters of Rome, and I am in the shackles of Arabia? It should be as easy for me to forsake all the bounty of Spain, as it is precious for me to behold the dust of the desolate abode.
Okay, so this is the Kuzari wishing he could get there, and he himself actually, he's buried in Israel as well. After he passed away, he managed to be brought up there, he lived in Spain, and as he came there, he was literally, when he just arrived, unfortunately he was killed when he first got to Eretz Yisrael, and he was buried in Eretz Yisrael as well. This is the Kuzari. So, to answer our first question, is Israel important to Jewish people? I think we've answered the question very well. The answer is absolutely, very, very much. It's in every part of our life, it's in every part of Yiddishkeit as halachic Jews. This Shulchan Aruch includes a tremendous amount that makes emphasis of Israel, which only brings the second question even stronger. Why? If we've established that Israel is so important, which probably everyone here knew already before I started talking, we all come here because we care about Israel, but why? Why is a piece of land so important to Judaism? That is the second question which we're going to focus on. And we're going to focus on that question in the background of the Six-Day War. We're going to paint the picture a little bit in the background of the Six-Day War. It happens to be in 1917 was also the First World War, during which time the Ottoman Empire was taken apart, and that portion of land that used to be the empire was then, by the League of Nations, given over to the British as the British mandate, the Turks of the Ottoman Empire, correct, with the express mandate to establish a homeland for the Jewish people in that area. And that was given as a job to the British. It happens to be that during that time, the white paper was issued limiting the intake of Jewish people into what was then called Palestine to 75,000 people for the 5 years, which basically closed the borders of Eretz Yisrael. It was no longer accessible to people at an extreme time of need, where Yiddish people needed to escape from burning Europe. The door to Israel was closed. It was blocked, which is why the first constitutional act in 1948 that was passed was the abolishment of the restrictions of intake of Jewish people. It made so much sense. That was the big deal. And by the time 1967 came, the Jewish population in Israel was up to 2.4 million Jews. We're now going to watch a short video that will help us understand and appreciate the build-up to the Six-Day War, which will then help us understand a better angle as to why Israel is so important.
The 6 days of warfare in 1967 between Israel and its Arab neighbors are legendary for the staggering speed and fury of Israel's military victory. But the dreadful days of rage and trepidation leading to the outbreak of hostilities were no less dramatic. The Arab nations refused to accept Israel's presence. To the Arab mind, the humiliation of their defeat in 1948 could be removed only by soaking the Holy Land in the blood of its Jewish inhabitants. In the months before June 1967, calls for Israel's annihilation swelled into a hysterical battle cry on the streets of every Arab country in the Middle East. Egyptian President stood at the heart of this incitement. A charismatic leader with appeal across the Arab world, Nasser campaigned for Arab unity and for the military destruction of Israel. His blood-curdling speeches were broadcast to every Arab nation, inflaming populations and shaping anti-Israel policy. Israel was a precarious sliver of land along the Mediterranean sand, barely 12 miles wide at her waist, and dwarfed by colossal foes in every direction. Egypt growled to her south, Jordan menaced her eastern border, and Syria rained mortars onto her north. These three nations commanded formidable standing armies and boasted hundreds of modern tanks, aircrafts, and artillery units. Additional Arab countries were prepared to offer varying degrees of commitment to any war against Israel, ranging from symbolic support to actual pilots, planes, tanks, and troops. Foremost among these were Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Kuwait, and Lebanon. Behind these loomed a larger foe, the Soviet Union, which armed and advised many of the Arab governments. Israel leaned on the support of a heavyweight but half-hearted ally, the United States of America. But President Lyndon B. Johnson, who took office in 1963, mired as he was in the Vietnam War, was more concerned with de-escalating the Cold War than addressing Israel's existential concerns. It was the Soviets who extended a lit match to the Arab powder keg that erupted in the 1967 Six-Day War. On May 13, 1967, the Soviets supplied Egypt with false intelligence, claiming that Israel has mobilized to invade Syria. They urge Egypt to take action, and in the first act of aggression, Nasser rolls his enormous Egyptian army into the Sinai Peninsula towards Israel's southern border. The Arab world erupts in euphoric celebrations and calls to slaughter the Jews. Nasser becomes an instant hero. Israel and the UN publicly clarify that Israel has not mobilized against Syria. But Nasser responds on May 15th by ordering the UN peacekeeping force that forms a buffer between Egypt and Israel to withdraw from Sinai. Israel's government is thrown into panic. UN Secretary General U Thant unilaterally orders his peacekeepers to comply with Nasser's demand. On May 19th, to Israel's horror and to the world's astonishment, the UN emergency force vanishes, leaving Egyptian force that would swell in just 3 days to some 80,000 troops and 600 tanks. Israel orders a large-scale mobilization of its army reserves and issues a stern warning that should Egypt close the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, Israel will consider it an act of war and react accordingly. Meanwhile, the Arab world escalates its rhetoric. On May 18th, Cairo Radio broadcasts the following message.
Every one of the 100 million Arabs has been living for the past 19 years on one hope, to live to see the day Israel is liquidated. There is no life, no peace, nor hope for the gangs of Zionism to remain in the occupied land. As of today, there no longer exists the UN International Emergency Force to protect Israel. The sole method we shall apply against Israel is a total war, which will result in the extermination of Zionist existence.
On May 20th, Syria's defense minister, Hafez Assad, declares,
Our forces are now entirely ready, not only to repulse any aggression, but to initiate the act ourselves, and to explode the Zionist presence in the Arab homeland of Palestine. The Syrian army, with its finger on the trigger, is united. I believe that the time has come to begin a battle of annihilation.
And then, it happened. On May 23rd, Egypt blockaded the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping in an act of war under international law. Israel's oil supply route is now cut off. No nation has rallied to Israel's cause. Meir Amit, head of the Israeli Mossad, later recalled the tense days before the outbreak of the war.
In the middle of the night, I received a visit from the CIA representative in Israel, who said to me, if you shoot first, you will stand alone in this battle.
Israel's military, intelligence, and civil leadership anticipate the worst. With Israeli men drafted into the army, the economy falters. Life grinds to a standstill. Students, housewives, and children dig trenches, build shelters, and volunteer for essential services. Anticipating record loss of life, Israel designates parks as mass cemeteries. A spirit of despair settles over the country's 2 million Jews, who whisper with dread of a second Holocaust. But Nasser is upbeat. He is ready for war. On May 26th, Nasser addresses the General Council of the International Confederation of Arab Trade Unions.
We are ready to enter a general war with Israel. The battle will be a general one, and our basic objective will be to destroy Israel.
On May 30th, King Hussein of Jordan signs a defense treaty with Egypt, placing the Jordanian army under Egyptian command. The Egyptian-Syrian-Jordanian axis is now complete. Ahmed Shukeri, chairman of the PLO in Jordanian Jerusalem, is asked in a June 1st news interview what will happen to the Israelis if there is a war. His response,
those who survive will remain in Palestine. I estimate that none of them will survive.
The Arab military buildup continues. Egypt has 100,000 troops and 930 tanks in the Sinai, and another 110,000 soldiers and 450 combat aircraft on notice. Syria has 63,000 troops, and Jordan 55,000. Israel's mostly civilian army is absurdly outnumbered in manpower, weaponry, planes, tanks, and artillery. Slightly more than 2 decades after the Holocaust, and less than 20 years since the United Nations resolution that authorized the Jewish people to create a state in their ancient homeland, the world had turned its back on the Jewish state and its population of survivors. There was no response to the Arab claim that the Jewish people are interlopers in their own land and have no right to the biblical land of Israel.
Wow. By the way, this video is available on the website afterwards if anyone wants to watch it or share it afterwards. The point of watching this video was obviously to get an idea of what was going on, but also to appreciate that the entire world stood by as the Arabs claimed that we don't have a right to Israel, and no one answered them. Not only that, they were told if they fired the first shot, they'll be standing alone. This is what we needed to see as a build-up and understanding of what allowed for the Six-Day War to take place. Fast forward 50 years, it's to now the year 2017. How similar and how different? How much has changed? Lots has changed, population-wise. In 1967, 2.4 million Jews in Israel. Today, we're upwards of 6 million Jews in Israel. 50 years on, Canaan Hara. From a military perspective, where we were scraping together to find sort of warfare back then, today we're top of the line, Canaan Hara. We say we mean the army in Israel, Baruch Hashem, is in a much better position than it has been. And in 50 years, we've grown tremendously. Lots has changed. Technologically, where we were just beginning then, now Israel's at the forefront. Technology, defense, medicine, it's a center in the entire world. And also in the sense of how peaceful our neighbors are with us. Whereas in 1967, all the Arab countries around them were trying to push them into the sea. Today, Israel has a peace treaty with Egypt, with Jordan, although they still have something to work out with Syria and the Palestinians. But in a sense, from a peace perspective, we have grown a lot in 50 years. Much has changed. On the flip side, though, some things haven't changed. Some things haven't changed. The threat to existence that people threatened Israel shouldn't exist back in 1967. Today we have in the north Hezbollah. Down in the south you have in Gaza, you have Hamas. You have in Iran, you have a nuclear threat. Wherever we go, there are people threatening and openly threatening to annihilate Israel, which hasn't changed much in 50 years. And for the same price, the world backing us. The hostility, the feelings of non-backing, the fact that we're on our own, hasn't changed much in 50 years. So on the one hand, we have had changes, a lot of changes, and perhaps we're in a much better position. But on the other hand, not much has changed. Does anyone want to add anything to this comparison before 50 years and after 50 years? How different are we today to the way we were in the time of the Six-Day War? Anyone? Anyone ever thought about this? Mike?
You're taking the side of a Jew,
then you're saying that Israel has been given the right to be there by the British. Well, the British generally didn't consult the Arabs. And that's one of the basic problems, because the Arabs still want the Jews out.
Okay.
So if you don't consult the people that you're literally next door neighbours, and in vast volumes far superior, then you're going to upset them.
Okay, and has that changed in 50 years?
No.
Hold on, yeah, okay, we're saying no here. It hasn't. Okay, good.
All we've got is a piece of paper that says, at the moment, we won't start fighting you. But that can change, as we well know.
Okay, so let's hold that. That's one thing that hasn't changed much. Ronnie, please. Territory.
At the moment, as Israel holds territory today, it gives Israel much better security. The Sinai, although it's not in Israeli hands, it is a demilitarized area, and the border is guaranteed not by the United Nations, but by the Egyptians themselves. I understand that that can change overnight, but as it stands on face value, it is better than in 1967.
Yeah.
And the same in the north with Syria. Syria's disintegrated. Syria at the moment is no threat, not the threat that it was. So Syria isn't what it was, and therefore Lebanon isn't what it was, because without Syria, Lebanon has got a problem. There were problems with the First and Second Lebanon War, and Hezbollah did do a lot of damage, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But Hezbollah on their own would suffer a great setback.
Wow. Yeah, so in that sense, there's a lot has changed. The military perspective today has changed a lot. Interesting. Let's do one more. David was going to say something. Yeah, go on.
I was thinking that after the 67 victory,
Uh-huh.
I think there's a spirit of optimism and exhilaration. And I'm not sure really whether that exists. We've given so much back. We didn't take the hard rise at the time. So I'm not sure whether things have gone down, possibly.
Oh wow! So we're actually reverting back to the way it was before, in a way. Interesting. What were you going to say?
67
Uh-huh.
was a unity of purpose.
Sorry?
There was a unity of purpose.
Okay.
Now, okay, it's a much more prosperous country, but it's getting back to some baseless hatred amongst the Jews.
Wow. Well, it's an interesting observation.
That's very true, actually. The division amongst Jewish societies today is very, very different from it. As you said, it was really total unity.
At the time. Although I don't know what it was like 2 years before.
The luxury
Of fighting.
Fighting amongst themselves.
Okay.
Quite literally.
Chas v'shalom. Chas v'shalom. And if there is, it should certainly stop, and please God for good reasons. However, what we have here is that the threat to our existence, although, as we said, Egypt and Syria are very different and no longer the threats to our existence, we have different threats. We have threats. The Hezbollah is a serious threat. As you said, a lot of damage was done. Hamas have a serious threat with the tunnel problem, with the constant rhetoric where it is, and the nuclear threat is a real threat. Whether it's the worst or it's not the worst is up for debate, and depending who you ask and what time. But there are serious threats to the security of Israel today, as they were before the 6-Day War. Now, thank God the 6-Day War we walked away miraculously safe, and we are confident that Hashem will continue to protect us in the future as well. But the threat to our existence continues to exist. And one could argue that the nuclear threat Iran has is much larger than the unprepared massive Egyptian army at the time. But without getting to that discussion, this has also become a big issue. The delegitimization of Israel. The BDS movement. That's become the correct form in American universities, here in the UK, where it's become the proper thing to say. And delegitimize and say Israel has no right to exist. It's no longer just in the Arab world. It's spread out even into Western culture as well, where it's acceptable to say, well, how dare Israel be here? Well, you have different extremes. Some only say it's 1967 borders. Some will go more extreme and say 1948 borders. Depends how we paint the picture. But the same problems we faced then, we face today. And the question is, what's wrong? Why are they so obsessed? A hostile obsession against Israel is a question that's got to make us ask the question. But more importantly, in 2002, when Arik Sharon, during the Intifada, was dealing with the United Nations, All Presidents, Kofi Annan famously said, is it possible that the entire world is wrong and Israel is right? Why is that quote so important? Because as people who are listening to what's going on, civilized people, we do take into account what people say. And when we're listening over and over again to people telling us, we are wrong, we are wrong, we are wrong, it's got to make us think, maybe we are wrong. So what I'd like to share with you tonight is we'll get into a discussion. What is our claim to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel, that makes it worthwhile fighting for? God forbid, dying for? And investing so much energy for a strip of land? Why are we so dead set that we need this land of Israel? And what is our claim to it? Generally speaking, there are 3 common claims that are presented for why the Jewish people should have the land of Israel, why the land of Israel should go to the Jews. We'll break them down into one category will be the historical claim. Second one, we'll call it the legal claim that we have to Israel. And the third one is the fact that survival claim. We need it in order to survive as a Jewish people. We're going to go through each one of these 3 claims, get a good understanding of it. We might discuss it a little bit, and then what we'll do is we'll try and figure out how that can help us when we're faced against an international community that either openly or just by abstaining don't support enough the Jewish claim to Israel and understanding where it's going from. We're going to start off on page 10. Text 6, which is a quote from a book of Maccabees. I don't know how Jewish this book is. It was written by a Jew apparently, but it's certainly not one of the books of Tanakh. However, it gives an interesting insight into this book. The background of where this quote comes from is before the Hanukkah story. The Syrian Greeks were having a war in between themselves, and there was a fellow called Tryphon, sorry I couldn't remember that on my own, who was fighting, I think it was his brother, and basically he was beaten. But Simon the Maccabee from the Hashmonaim family had helped to arrange this defeat, and in return was given autonomy over the land of Eretz Yisrael, where he could behave as if he was in charge. He went to war and managed to conquer a place called Gezer and Yaffo. And as life continued, Antiochus, the famous Antiochus from the Hanukkah story, came into power, and he sent messengers to Shimon, the Kohen Gadol, who was the Hashmonaim, the Jewish leader of the time, and said, hold on, now it's time to give me back those places that you have conquered, because at the end of the day I'm the king, and not only that, I want you to give me the taxes that you collected from these cities that you have conquered. So in response to this messenger, text 6 please Alan, on page 10, Simon answers.
Simon answered Antiochus' messenger and said to him, it's not a foreign land that we have conquered, neither is it possession of others over which we rule. It is the heritage of our ancestors, which was for some time unjustly conquered, which we, upon obtaining the power to do so, have restored to ourselves.
Interesting. He's talking to somebody who's in a lot of power. A very powerful man. He's got to give it his best shot. He's got to give it his best argument. What is Simon's best argument? He says, hold on, I know you would like to have these cities, and I know you're the king of the area, but these cities belong to us. And why do they belong to us? Because they always did. And although we were kicked out of those cities for a while, it's our land because our parents had it. And that is his argument. It's interesting, you have here in figure 1.2, that throughout the 3,000 years of history, there's always been a Jewish presence in Israel. Sometimes ruled by Jews, very often not. And you can see on the map here on figure 1.2 and page 11. However, any credible historian will clearly tell you that there has clearly been Jewish presence as a land going back from way back when. Here you have historical evidence of King David, and then you have also from the times of the Second Temple. There are many artifacts that corroborate with the dates and the records that we have as Jewish people have always historically been in the land of Israel. Text 7a is a quote from the Israeli Declaration of Independence. And here we have how built into the Declaration of Independence, this historical claim is part of the claim, the Israeli claim to Israel. Text 7a, please, Ronnie.
The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here their spiritual, religious and political identity was shaped. Here they first attained statehood, created cultural values of national and universal significance, and gave to the world the eternal book of books. After being forcibly exiled from their land, the people kept faith with it throughout their diaspora, and never ceased to pray and hope for the return to it, and for the restoration in it of their political freedom. In 1897, the sons of the spiritual father of the Jewish state, Theodore Herzl, the first Zionist Congress convened and proclaimed the right of the Jewish people to national rebirth in their own country.
Okay, so it's clearly in there. Part of the claim is the fact that this is where we always have been. Historically, this is our land, and therefore we deserve to have the land of Israel. It's a very strong claim. However, I'm going to open up, if anyone has a suggestion of why this claim might not be such a strong claim. What could a counter-argument to the historical claim the Jews have to Israel, which historically is very strong. It's very clear that we were certainly in Israel. Is there anything that goes against that or counter-argues the historical claim the Jews have to Israel? Anyone? Ronnie?
If everybody returned to the land of 3,000 to 5,000 years, it would be total chaos.
Okay. First again, come on, sorry, you want to add to that?
So we forfeited that claim because the temple was destroyed, so we were exiled, so we're not allowed back again.
Okay, so we've lost our rights, or if this is a different, maybe a slightly different argument. One argument is, very nice historically with there, I mean, the Native Americans were originally in America. Egypt was ruled by the Greeks, so maybe we should give back all the lands. Maybe America should be kicked out in the face of the Native Americans, because historically, the Native Americans have a right to Israel. Well, not anyone else?
just want to say that
Complete.
those words were not my words, those were Mao Zedong's.
Okay. Here we are. Anyone else? Good quote.
It's just a total exercise.
Okay, yeah, but we're looking at the claim of his history
History, but
and the counterclaim to the history.
Some people say Moshiach is not there, so therefore we shouldn't be in the land.
Okay, but let's say, okay, we're staying away from that for a moment. We're looking at the claim that we have historically there. Is there anything wrong with it? So we're saying from a religious point of view, perhaps it's not the right thing to do. Okay. Hold on, we're going to hold that. That's in lesson 6. We're going to have a lot to say about this question. So I'm going to stay clear. Correct, and that's what I'm saying. Absolutely. Yeah, hold on. Mike?
We're relying on the history, on Jewish history, that we believe in, but that's not necessarily what other people believe in, and therefore they could debate that we're not entitled to the land.
Okay, I hear that. However, in this particular case, any serious historian, we're not talking about people who are willing to fabricate stuff, but anyone who looks at the facts on the ground, there's enough artifacts that corroborate with the historical dates from Jewish and non-Jewish sources.
Yes, just because you're there, it doesn't mean you're entitled to it.
Right, but historically, Jews have always been in Israel.
No, the Jews have been all over the world.
There's historical facts to show, although we've been elsewhere, we have still always had presence in the land.
So there's no other country in the world that Jews have never been, that Jews have been in as long as Israel.
That's also true, but it's always been our homeland. Historically. From a non-Jewish perspective.
I suppose you could equally argue, or I wouldn't argue, but I suppose people could argue, that the various different Muslim clans, tribes, have been in there for an extended period of time. The Palestinians will claim that they have ancestors who lived there for an extended period of time. But
You remind me of a joke.
No, what I'm saying is clearly there has been a Muslim presence for hundreds and hundreds. There were, prior to 48, there was a Muslim presence.
There was a presence prior to 48?
For an extended period of time, actually the Ottoman period, and...
Quick joke, just because you brought it up. Yeah. So the Israeli Prime Minister stood in the UN, and he has to explain this particular question, the rights of Jewish people to the land of Israel. But before he starts, he gets up there and he says, listen everybody, I have to share with you a complaint I have against the Palestinians. When Moses came down from the mountain and he came to Israel, and he hit the rock and there was flowing water. He took his clothes off and he went in to bathe in the water. And as he was in the water, some Palestinian came and stole his clothing. As he's in the middle of talking, the Palestinian representative says, excuse me, the Palestinians weren't around in the times of Moses. They didn't even exist yet. Says the Prime Minister, thank you very much. That's all I needed you to hear. Now let's continue what I have to say. No, the Palestinians don't have a claim to way back when. They have a few hundred, right. Without getting into...
I'm not talking about Palestinians, I'm talking about Muslims as a group.
Hold on, okay. There's another very interesting counter-argument, which is, number one, because we once had it, is that enough to take it back? But number two also, where did we get it from? The Torah described. We went to war against Canaan, and we conquered all of them. So if we want it back because we were there, then the Canaanites can come knocking on our doors and say, thank you very much. Okay, thank God they're not around, right? But is that enough of a claim? Is that enough of a claim because we were once there? Our own claim doesn't stand on its own 2 feet. That could be a counter-argument to the historical claim. Let's move on to a second claim we have to Israel, and that is the legal claim. The legal claim, interestingly, funnily enough, there were many Jewish lawyers. You might know about this. And there were very good Jewish lawyers back in the time at the beginning as well. And they made sure, as they were going through, that the land of Israel was being taken on very strong legal grounds. Going back to the beginning, we started off saying before, 1917, when the Ottoman Empire was disbanded and was taken apart. So the British were actually tasked with the job of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And it was during that time where the famous Balfour Declaration was made in 1917, during which Balfour said to Rothschild, conveying a message on behalf of His Majesty, that there is a favorable interest in establishing the homeland in Israel. Didn't actually quite work out that way. It took a time, but there was a royal decree, so to speak, that Israel should have. A couple of years later, in 1922, the British Mandate for Palestine, which was made together by the League of Nations. The League of Nations at that time was the equivalent we have to the UN today, where again, they agreed to go ahead with making a homeland for Jews in what was called Palestine at the time. So that's the League of Nations. And then in 1948, after 1947 vote, in 1949, Israel was finally admitted into the UN. It was 161 out of 192 countries, resolution 273, which was establishment of Israel as an accepted nation amongst the nations, the United Nations. And here we have very strong build-up, as Israel is considered a legal nation as every other nation, and therefore from a legal point of view, international law, Israel has every right to exist. And this once again is worded into the Declaration of Independence, where they bring in the concept of being a legal nation as well. This is text 7b, which is on page 13. Who's reading? Ronnie, is this you? Please. Ron, have you read? Sorry. Anthony, go.
This right was recognised in the Balfour Declaration on the 2nd of November 1917 and reaffirmed in the mandate of the League of Nations, which in particular gave international sanction to the historic connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel, and to the right of the Jewish people to rebuild its national home. On the 29th of November 1947, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution calling for the establishment of a Jewish state in the land of Israel. The General Assembly required the inhabitants of the land of Israel to take such steps as were necessary on their part for the implementation of that resolution. This recognition by the United Nations of the right of Jewish people to establish their state is irrevocable.
Okay, anyone who's a lawyer here, once it's passed, more or less. We have a legal right to the land of Israel. It's a strong argument that we have. Anyone want to suggest a counter argument? How would that not be so strong? What would weaken this argument?
Could others make the same legal claim? Could others make the same legal claim?
It's quite a lot stacked up there to make. Quite a lot stacked up there to make. Go on, David.
Wasn't it some of the wording, isn't it conditional upon giving equal rights to everybody else? So maybe if you don't give that condition, then maybe...
Okay, so there are some conditions and clauses that could, or if it's down to the legals, you never know, you can have someone who could find something. But when, more than just finding loopholes,
Dissolution of the UN.
there you go. What happens is votes change. Or what happens if there's no UN anymore? Or if the UN itself decides to go, which we have seen, where all of a sudden people no longer, or the people in position of power no longer like this kind of thing, just like they passed one law. And if we're at their mercy, we're at the mercy of the votes of whoever is in power at the time.
I don't see they can't necessarily, they could, for example, vote into existence a Palestinian state on the 67th August if they so choose. But I can't see how it's humanly possible that the UN could actually vote any other UN country out of existence. I don't think that...
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
I don't think there's
Yeah, it's a bit stretched.
They have done it.
I don't think there's
Really?
basis for that.
Yes, Taipei used to be the official Chinese nation at the United Nations, and from the late 70s
Learning stuff.
onwards, they changed, and it's the People's Republic of China now.
Well, there you go. Wow, that's an example there. I didn't know that. We'll have to do some homework. Okay, thank you for sharing that. But in text 7c, we do find, though, that before we actually read it, there's a third argument included into the Declaration of the Independence of Israel. And that is the third common argument, which is the survival argument. The Jewish people, at the time when the state was created, were just coming through the Holocaust. It was a time where it was clear and obvious to all that the Jewish people, needed a place to be able to protect themselves, to fight for themselves. After 2,000 years of persecution, it was absolutely essential to have a place. And Israel was the answer to that place. So let's read text 7c. Please, Mark.
The catastrophe that recently befell the Jewish people, the massacre of millions of Jews in Europe, was another clear demonstration of the urgency of solving the problem of its homelessness by re-establishing in the land of Israel open the gates of the homeland wide to every Jew and confer upon the Jewish people the status of a fully privileged member of the nation.
Thank you. I think we're missing a letter there. It's the mine. Yeah, okay. Good. So we have this third claim now. And as I said, it's also built into the Declaration of Independence. The argument that Jewish people need to survive. Anyone suggest a counter-argument to this? It's a very strong claim. The Jewish people need to survive. Every human being deserves to be protected. History has shown that the Jews haven't been protected by the world, as unfortunately the World War II clearly demonstrated, and therefore Jews have a very good claim. We deserve to have a land. Ronnie, go for it. Counter-argument.
The argument is that the United Nations have the Declaration of Human Rights, which protects all racial groups, all groups throughout the world, including indigenous Indians of South America, who've been badly neglected. But nevertheless, all people should be protected internationally. Wherever they are, they don't need to get transferred to a place where they are the majority.
Interesting. So there should be able to be protection even outside of Israel. Okay. Maybe the flip side would be, well, historically it hasn't worked for us, and therefore we have to figure out a solution. But yeah, we've got a counterclaim. Hold on, and we'll get Anthony here.
One could argue that it's the existence of the Jewish homeland that threatens Jewish survival the most.
Really? Go on, help us understand.
Well, they tend to want to have the land of Israel for themselves. So if the Jewish people were to vacate the land of Israel or live somewhere else in a territory that's not disputed, then the Jews potentially would be more safe because they're not in harm's way anymore.
Right, so the venue they've chosen isn't the safest place.
It's a contentious place. Everyone thinks it's theirs.
Okay.
There is no alternative place, because the point really is wherever you go, there is always going to be someone who says, hold on a minute, this is ours.
Okay.
It doesn't make any difference where you put the land, or even if you don't have the land. Before the land was there in 1917, you've always had anti-Semitism.
Okay.
Is it stopping it, or is it inflaming it?
Hold on, that's one argument. We're doing well on this one.
Maybe you could argue why does religion have to be tied to a land?
Okay. Why do religion need a land? We'll get to that as well. It's a good claim.
Going back to the UN vote itself, why should, I've heard the argument, why should the guilt of the Allied Nations over letting all the Jews perish in the Shoah be justification for setting up a state for one group of the victims?
Okay.
Because it wasn't, the vote was the whole of the UN who voted, it wasn't just...
That's the argument.
The European.
Let me ask you a different question here. If we just throw a different question here. Is a Jew living in Israel safer than a Jew living in UK? Yes. Anyone else? No. Definitely Israel. Doesn't having all the Jews in one place, this is I think what Anthony was getting at, doesn't this make it worse?
But I don't think you could really answer that question, because it's continuous on so many facts. Take France, for example, at this moment in time.
Okay. We're not going to get to the answer. We're just suggesting that there's a counter-argument to saying keep people safe by bringing them to Israel. Hold on one second. Maybe it's not more safe. Question number one is, well, why in Israel? Maybe go to Uganda, as the suggestion was. Or perhaps, the deserts of Australia. I don't know, wherever Israel managed to turn Israel into a fantastic place, put them in a place where there's nobody there, and get them working. Wasn't there a place at the far end of Russia that the Jews were at one point?
Yeah, Berobishan.
Berobishan, I couldn't pronounce it. Yeah, good. The third argument, though, another interesting counter-argument, which is, although let's accept that we as Jewish people were threatened, and therefore we need to find ourselves a place to stay safe. We must find a place where we can protect ourselves and not have to rely on anybody else. But that's our problem. Why does that become everyone else's problem? Why do they owe us that place? Yes, we've got a problem and we've got to solve it. But that's not a right for us to take land or force the United Nations to give us a piece of land, or force people to give us a donation, we've got a problem, we've got to solve it. It doesn't necessarily explain why we have a right to it. It explains why we're looking for it. It doesn't necessarily explain why we have a right to it. So there are different counter-arguments that can be given. However, between all these three different arguments that we have, each one a very solid claim in itself, the historical claim, the international law claim, and the Jewish survival claim, one would expect that as the Jewish people living in Israel, we should have very good backing. People should accept us there. People should be happy to see us with this land. They should be encouraging us, helping protect us, working with us to stay protected, and yet,
Which people? You say people, help them.
119 nations in the United Nations should all be with us trying to keep us safe. Why not? The entire world should be. Yet we don't. Not only that, the only country out of those countries in the United Nations that are challenged and asked, how dare you be here? Justify your existence here, is the one nation that has all these claims and can back it up. Can the Americans explain the historical connection to America? Can they claim that they needed to survive or that they have legal rights to be there? There are so many countries that have fought in order to conquer, and yet they're not called into question, and for some reason the Jews are. There is a hostile obsession with Israel. Now we're not here to figure out how to quiet that obsession. What we are here to try and figure out is maybe a little bit about why is there an obsession, but more importantly, to have an answer to Kofi Annan's claim. Is it possible that the whole world is wrong and Israel is right? And we're going to suggest, yes, Israel is right. But let's try and get into our head, why are we right? Hold on. I'm going to make another suggestion. Mashiach will certainly come and take us all back to Israel. You're absolutely right, and that's what we say in benching and in Amida, and we say all about it. But we're going to look for a fourth claim. It's not instead of, but in addition to those claims, which will be the Torah's claim that the Jewish people have to Israel. And that will explain a lot about why we are so sure of ourselves and we're even willing to fight. And God forbid, unfortunately, people have died for Israel. Why are we so determined? It'll also explain at the end why we're having so much trouble getting the backing from people around us. Before we go there, we're going to ask you to take a break. Stop thinking about Israel for a minute. Let's relax. I'm going to give you a shir. It's not Gemara shir, it's not a Mishnah shir. It's a shir on Chumash. Okay? We're going back to the very first pasuk, the very first verse in the opening of the Torah. Bereshis bara Elokim es shamayim v'aretz, in the beginning of Hashem's creation, He created heaven and earth. Okay? Now when we learn Chumash, and this is true even from very young children, we need help. Even great scholars look for help. We look for commentary. In the Torah, there is a basic, most accepted commentary, and that is Rashi. Rav Shlomo Yitzhaki actually lived in France, and he wrote the dummy's guide, the dummy's helper to learning Torah. So if you're stuck, you know they tell the kids the police is your friend. Rashi is your friend when you're learning Chumash. Rashi helps you out. Well, Rashi challenges, and he's asking on the very first verse of the Torah, why is the Torah talking about creation? Now, question for everybody here. What is the description of the 5 books of Moses? What is the 5 books of Moses set out to do? What is the book about? Help me out. The Torah. Teach you about life. Torah.
Minutes.
Hold on, Melanie. What is the Torah about?
Blueprint for life.
Blueprint for life. Okay, we're doing well. Anyone else?
Oh, history.
History. Law. Anyone else? One more?
Way of life.
Way of life, Holly?
It's God's wisdom.
God's wisdom. Okay. Now, Rashi suggests that the most important job of the Torah is to be a book of law to tell us which commandments to do and the commandments of what not to do. That is the main purpose of the book. Now that ties in whoever said it's the way of life, God's wisdom, and he gives us the book of law, that fits in. Rashi challenges the notion of the Torah being a storybook. It's a storybook. History in a book of law. When you go to study law, you study history. You need history to put things into context. You don't study history in a book of law. It says Rashi, the entire first book of Bereshis, first half of the second book of Shemos, the story of all the way down to the Jews going down into Egypt until they leave Egypt, until arriving and Mount Sinai, says Rashi, seems out of place. He says, the book starts off with, in the beginning God created, and Rashi asks, shouldn't it have started off with, this month shall be to you the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, of a new month. Let's read text 8. Who are we up to here? Skip. Mike, please. Text 8, page 15.
Rabbi Yitzhak said, the Torah ought to have begun, this month shall be to you, etc. The first mitzvah commanded to the people of Israel. Why then does it begin with, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth? The strength of his words he related to his people, to give them the inheritance of the nations. If the nations of the world will say to Israel, you are thieves for having conquered the lands of the 7 nations, Israel will reply, the entire world is God's. He created it and granted it to whomever he desired. It was his will to give it to the 7 nations, and it was his will to take it from them and give it to us.
Rashi lived in the 11th century. The Jews weren't in control of Israel, and no one was calling them thieves. It's almost prophetic. 1,000 years ago, Rashi is writing that there will be a BBC and a CNN that will claim that the Jewish people are thieves. And here is the answer to their claim. Where is it? In the very first verse of the Torah. It says, Rashi, basic commentary, basic understanding of the Torah is to appreciate that Hashem wrote it into the book. The very book of law. We don't start off with mitzvahs. Instead, we start off in the beginning. To emphasize that Hashem is in charge, and Hashem is the one who created the world, and he gave Israel to the Jews. And that's how we answer people that say, thieves, you took away the land of Israel. 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, Rashi is telling us how to answer people who claim we have no right to Israel. Hold on. What's interesting though is, we're still in the middle of Mashiach, okay? We're not really talking about Israel now. We're talking about the Pasuk. That's one verse. There are hundreds of verses between in the beginning God created and the first mitzvah. There's an entire fifth, a book, a full one of 5 books of the Torah, plus another half almost, until we get to the 10 Commandments. What's all that about? Garden of Eden, flood and Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph gets sold as a slave down to Egypt. What's all that for? That's all history. How does that help us in doing mitzvahs? So Rashi's given a basic answer, but it's begging for more explanation. Why does God have to tell us in a book of law these facts of history? The suggestion I'm going to make, it's obviously based on the Torah sources, is that actually throughout those stories, Garden of Eden, Noah and the flood, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, Joseph going down to Egypt, coming out of Egypt, one thing keeps repeating itself, and that is Israel. First time God speaks to Abraham, covenant of the parts, tells him about Israel. First time he speaks to Isaac, tells him, I will give your children the land on which you stand, Israel. Promise to Jacob. Burning bush, Moses meets God for the first time. What does he tell him? You will lead the Jews out of Egypt to go to Israel. In other words, the history that we learn about before the commandments is the background and understanding of what a vital, important part of mitzvahs, commandments, following God's orders includes and it needs, it's a necessity to have the land of Israel in order to fulfill the mitzvahs. This is what we're going to learn now. This is going to be very important to us, to understand that the promise of the land that we have from God isn't just a gift to us. Israel wasn't given to the Jews as a gift to us. It was given to the mission to which we are obligated. In other words, Israel is not ours. Israel belongs to the Jewish mission. It's not just that we are very lucky and God said, you know what, you guys, you can have it. It's a nice piece of land, have this one. No. God has given us a responsibility. And that responsibility is what's going to be spelled out the rest of the Torah with all the mitzvahs. But because in order to fulfill that responsibility we need the land of Israel, that's why the land was given to the Jews, and it's specified from the beginning of creation up until 2,500 years until the Jews actually get the Torah, over and over again, and the Jews will get Israel. And that way they'll be able to do the mission, the responsibility for which we have. That's why that first book and a half is there. For the Israel element in the entire book and a half. That's the end of the share. Okay, let's get back to Israel. We now understand that the Jewish people don't just have Israel because we are lucky and we were gifted. We have Israel because we need it in order to fulfill the purpose for which we were created. What's our claim to Israel? What's our claim to the land? In order for Jewish people to fulfill the reason we were created for, that's why we need the land of Israel. Now, I haven't explained myself. I've just made a statement. I've said the Jewish people need Israel in order to do the mitzvahs. Let's learn some of the laws of mitzvahs and see how important is Israel to the Torah vision of Jewish people. To the purpose, the job, the fulfillment of why we were created in the first place. It's different than what we usually hear. But let me show you a few things. Number one, seen kippahs before? There are a lot of Israeli kippahs. The Ramban suggests that mitzvahs, not just kippahs isn't actually necessarily a mitzvah, right? But mitzvahs in general were specifically given for people that live in Israel. Let's read this. This is fascinating. Text 9, page 16. Rishma, we're back to you.
The sages of the Talmud, the two books, one of them declare that anyone who lives outside of the land is comparable to one who has no God, as it is written, to give to you the land of Canaan, to be a God for you, Leviticus 25:58. For all the mitzvot of the Torah were given primarily to be fulfilled by those who dwell in the land of God.
Okay, so what we have here is the Ramban suggesting that although mitzvahs have to be fulfilled around the world, the ideal way to do a mitzvah is when we are in Israel. It happens to be that today, out of 248 positive commands, we only have the ability to fulfill, anyone? 83. All the other ones are on hold until Israel is once again a halachic place where we have a Beit HaMikdash.
What was those numbers again?
248 positive commands, 83 apply today. 83 out of 248. Some mathematicians here, what's the percentage? I don't remember. A third. That means 2/3 of the positive commands that we have are on hold. It's a lot. One short of a third, yeah? That's very interesting. Now, I must tell you, there's a famous fellow, happened to be Jewish, called Albert Einstein. Anyone heard of him before? Albert Einstein was once giving a presentation actually to a Zionist council in New York in 1938, during which they were discussing the future building and establishing of a state, and he warned of the danger of having a Jewish state. Now, interestingly, what was he worried about in 1938? He said his concern was that the Jewish people are a light into the nation. We are a spiritual ideal, where we are doing important things, but spiritual things. And he warned that if we start getting into politics, and we start making lands and armies and cities, and you've got to have your dustbin collection and everything else, we would risk losing the spirituality that Judaism is gifting to the world. That was his claim. Clearly, the Ramban doesn't agree with him. The Ramban is telling us not only is it okay to have a land, it's essential that we have a land. Not only is it okay to have a place where it's a Jewish homeland, all the mitzvahs are on hold until we're only doing it partially until we get back there. What was Albert Einstein missing? What are we going to learn today that Albert Einstein didn't know about Torah? Now, although he was a tremendous scholar, it's probably safe to say he wasn't a tremendous Talmudist or halachist, right? He didn't necessarily know all the Jewish perspective per se. And that's why he would have come up with such a statement. But in text 10 we have a quote from...
Let's ask a question.
Yes, please.
Yes?
Yes?
It's written outside of the land.
Correct.
Yeah, it's saying that anyone who lives outside the land is comparable to one who has no God. So what's that saying about the sages above that?
Very good question, and oftentimes it's pointed out. The question basically is, how can the Babylonian Talmud, which was written in Iraq, claim that people living outside of Israel have no God when they themselves are writing this text? Talmud text is written outside Israel. It's explained that this text, although it could have been written in the Jerusalem Talmud, it was specifically not. It was specifically written by the Babylonian Talmud so as to put things within context. We're not suggesting that if you're living outside Israel, you might still worship idols. No. Okay? Chas v'shalom. That's not the point. The point is that it's essential to us. Right? That kind of answers your question a little bit. Good. I'm just going to borrow a cup here, please. We're going to have a water. Okay. We have here text 10. Rabbi Yossi, please. This is from a former Chief Rabbi of England, of Great Britain, I should say, Lord Dr. Jonathan Sachs, who explains a little bit about understanding. Text 10, please, Rabbi Yossi. This is page 17.
Why should your religion be tied to a land? It sounds absurd, especially in the context of monotheism. Surely the God of everywhere can be served anywhere. Buddhism is not primarily about personal salvation, the relationship between the individual and God, and the inner recesses of the soul. It's about collective redemption. We are social animals, therefore we find God in society. That's what we discover when we reflect on the basic structure of the Torah's many commands. They include laws about the administration of justice, the conduct of war, ownership of land, employer-employee relationships, the welfare of the poor, and the periodic cancellation of debts. Laws shape a society, and society needs space. A sacred society needs sacred space, a holy land. Hence Jews and Judaism need their own land. In 4,000 years, from much of which Jews lived in exile, the people of the covenant were scattered over the face of the earth. There is no land in which Jews have never lived, yet in all those centuries, there was only one land where they were able to do what almost every other nation takes for granted, create their own society in accordance with their own beliefs.
Paragraph there?
The premise of the Torah is that God must be found somewhere in particular, if he is to be found everywhere in general.
Wow. So the suggestion here is that although God is everywhere, and human beings can connect with Hashem everywhere, that is not the main purpose of creation. I think the words he used here was, the primary point here is about collective redemption. Collective redemption? Redeeming from what? So perhaps a different word would be to transform a world that is void of godliness and make this world into a different type of world, a world that has in it spirituality. We're not supposed to be angels, we're supposed to be good humans. We're not supposed to be living as hermits, out in the open with no connection to each other or to anything mundane. We have to be living in a society, and that society has to become an elevated society. That is the purpose of creation. If that's the purpose of creation, to have a society, a normal life that includes in it a spiritual element, a specialty, a godliness, then it makes sense that this religion of spirituality needs a plot of land to make the land become a spiritual place. If it were purely a spiritual ideal, then land would make no difference. But if Yiddishkeit is about making real life special, we need real life. We need a place. We need time, and we need a venue. We need to have a place where we can transform it, and that's why it makes sense to have a sliver of land called Israel, where the Jewish people need an essential plot of land, and it's absolutely vital for the mitzvahs to have their effect, to have that plot of land. Is this making sense? That if the mission is to have a transformation of creation, not of angels, then we need a place in creation where it can be a main starting point for that to take place. It follows into text 11 here from Rabbi Kaplan and actually describes how Israel was positioned to the best possible place for this to take place. Text 11, please. Mike.
If you look at a map, you will see that the geographical location of the land of Israel virtually guaranteed to play a key role in the tides of civilization. The old world consisted of two great land masses, Eurasia and Africa. It was impossible to travel from Eurasia to Africa without passing through the Holy Land. Therefore, every conqueror, every civilization that passed from one continent to another had to pass through the Holy Land and come into contact with the Jew. Besides being a gateway between the north and the south, the Holy Land is part of the keystone link between the east and the west. In the past, most caravan routes linking the Atlantic and the Pacific passed directly through the Holy Land. The land of Israel was therefore literally the crossroads of civilization.
So we've made a claim, thank you, Matt. We've made a claim that Israel is about transforming the world. Sounds like a nice religious claim to make. We actually look on the map and see that God positioned the land of Israel in the geographical mapped out place to do exactly that. It is in the center, the link between north and south, crossing from east to west. The great land masses that were there at the time were essentially there. Now one could ask, this is true of the ancient times. What about today? People are flying everywhere. We don't need to go through Israel yet. If you look at central places for technology, central places for medicine, defense systems, again, God has made sure that Israel is in the center of the universe, and it's our job to keep making sure to be shining from that central place. So if God continuously keeps us in the center for the good, and let me just say also, that's probably one of the reasons why God keeps us in the news 24/7. There'll always be something about Israel every week. We are constantly out there because we are supposed to be in a position where we can be making this influence, having this effect, not on the spiritual realms, not on the angels. We are making spirituality down here on earth. That's why we have Israel, and that's why we need Israel. That's why we're positioned where we are. Tremendous. Let's read text 12. Let's read text 12. I just want to tell you, text 12 is an interesting... Let's read it first. We're up there. We'll pass you, Mike, go.
Is it possible to justify the existence of a Jewish state? This question, raised with increased frequency in recent years, is not just a theoretical one. Israel will endure as a Jewish state only if it can be defended in both the physical and the moral sense. Over the many years in which I have participated in debates about Israel's constitutional foundations and the rights of its citizens, I did not generally feel this question to be particularly urgent. Indeed, I believe that there was no more need to demonstrate the legitimacy of a Jewish state than there was for any other nation state, and I did not take the claims to the contrary very seriously. Those who denied the legitimacy of Israel as a Jewish state were, in my eyes, little different from the radical ideologues who dismiss all national movements as inherently immoral, or who insist that Judaism is solely a religion with no right to national self-expression. Their claim seem marginal and unworthy of systematic refutation. Today I realise that my view was wrong. The repudiation of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state is now a commonly held position, and one that is increasingly seen as legitimate. Among Israeli Arabs, for example, it is nearly impossible to find anyone willing to endorse, at least publicly, the rights of Jews to national self-determination in the land of Israel. Rejection of the Jewish state has in fact become the norm amongst most representatives of the Arab public, including those who have sworn allegiance as members of Knesset. More worrisome, perhaps, is the fact that many Jews in Israel agree with this view, or at least show a measure of sympathy for it.
Wow. Let me just put it into different words. In Torah words, God is the God of heavens. Most people know this quote. Most people have no problem with this. But the second half of this verse is where Yiddishkeit stands out. God is the God of heavens and of earth. God of earth means that this world that runs by whatever type of civilization you work in, to capitalism, wherever you are, however the nations work with each other, Hashem has an opinion and a vision for this world, for us as human beings living what we might call normal life. And the land of Israel was given to us so that we should be positioned to transform that sort of idea. Interestingly, David Ben-Gurion used this argument in a very interesting predicament he was in. In 1973, former Chief Rabbi Meir Lau, the survivor, great orator, he was a young rabbi at the time, and he met David Ben-Gurion. And he says to him, I have always been looking for an opportunity to clarify whether a story I heard about you, David Ben-Gurion, is true or false. What was the story? In 1937, the British Peel Commission had David Ben-Gurion standing before him, and they were challenging him on his claim for Israeli Jewish rights to Israel. And they said to him, you immigrants, you've come off the boat from Europe. How do you stand a claim against Arabs who've been living here with deeds, claims to the land? And on the table there was a Bible, which they used for swearing. He picks up the Bible and he says, this is my deed, or our deed. So Rabbi Lau asked Ben-Gurion, Him ze nachon, yeah, is it true? And famously David Ben-Gurion replies, Emet v'yatziv, it's a quote from Davening, yes, it's true and it's steadfast, absolutely. In other words, David Ben-Gurion also, in his time of need, where he's pushed to the corner, appreciated the ultimate claim. The truest claim we have to the land is the promise we have from Hashem. And the reason why Hashem gave us that promise, it's not just for us, it's because we are on a mission. Unfortunately, the Declaration of Independence, the Israeli Declaration of Independence, though there was much debated, today does not have any mention of God or God's promise in the declaration. The Israeli national anthem, unfortunately, sadly, has no mention of God. I mean, even the British national anthem starts off with God. The American national anthem has God. Unfortunately, from a whatever type of word, people are getting overly worried and carried away. The Jewish people of all people, after having the greatest miracles, had a hard time putting God, the purpose, the point of why we have Israel, into the equation. And perhaps one could suggest that that may be a big part of the reason as to why our lack of confidence, which is showing out in the United Nations and elsewhere, and this is why we are getting picked on more than ever. Let's end off with text 13. One more text and we'll call it a day. And Yoram, page 21.
Today the overwhelming majority of those who challenge Israel's right to exist believe in Israel as God. That is to say, the God of Abraham. They belong to the large family of faith known as the Abrahamic monotheisms. To them we must humbly say, when it comes to political conflict, let us search for a political solution. Let us work together in pursuit of peace. But when it comes to religion, let us not forget that without Judaism there would be no Christianity and no Islam. Unlike Christianity and Islam, Judaism never sought to convert the world and never created an empire. All it sought was one tiny land promised to the children of Israel by the Creator of the universe, in whom Jews, Christians and Muslims all believe. Sadly, Rabbi Isaac was right, and Rashi was right to quote him at the beginning of his Torah commentary. The Jewish people would be challenged on its right to the land by people who claim to worship the same God. That same God summons us today to the dignity of the human person, the sanctity of human life and the imperative of peace. And that same God tells us that in a world of 82 Christian nations and 56 Muslim ones, there is room for one small Jewish state.
Wow. Okay, there is a small video which is supposed to be the recap. We don't have time. It's available on the website. I'm going to give you the short summary so we know we can try and piece together an hour and a half of talking. Number one, we started off with 3,000 years the Jews have had a presence in Israel. We have always longed to go there. Aliyah movements have always brought us back there. Yet, in 1967, it was once again clear and abundant that Jewish people's rights to Israel was strongly in question by the Arab neighbors, and none of the United Nations were willing to speak up and to say, yes, the Jews do have a right. Our rights to Israel are still being challenged. We spoke about the three different claims we have to Israel: the historical claim, the legal claim, and the survival claim. And then we went on to say the counter-arguments for each one. We finished off now by understanding that actually the Jewish claim to Israel is the fact that God gave it to us. And we have to know, why did God give it to us? Because we are supposed to be doing something here in this world. The purpose of our birth isn't just to have fun. Of course you should have fun. You should have fun doing whatever you do. Absolutely. But the point is to transform, to elevate, to bring God not into shul. God's in shul anyhow. Where do we have to bring God? Home. My kitchen. My dining room. My bedroom. My workplace. My shopping sprees. My holidays. That's why I need to find God. And that's why I need a piece of land to start, to have an epicenter place where God meets, heaven and earth meet. Which is why we still continue to face Israel. And that's our claim. And when we speak that clearly and we say the truth as it is, that's when we'll be accepted. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Same time, same place next week. We're going to be moving on to lightning strikes, preemptive strikes. And please just look on the screen, this website, myjli.com/survival is where you will find the slideshow we just watched, the videos we watched, the summary video, additional articles and links, myjli.com/survival.